Vivian gave to me. But this one is better. Do you know what happened to Boy? Of course, I think my recorder is still in her car. That's why I don't have it. Because we went to the computer shop yesterday, and I think I forgot to take my bag out from her car. The recorder is in her car, in the bag. Okay, so begin with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Okay, good. Okay, so we've been reading Sutta number 111. This is the Anupada Sutta, which is translated by Venerable Nyanamoli as one by one as they occur. Okay, and this sutta is describing the experience, the meditative experience of Venerable Sāriputta, the sequential process by which he achieved arahantship. And if you remember, according to the Buddha's or the account that I gave last week, after Venerable Sāriputta entered the Buddhist order, it took him 2 weeks of practice to achieve arahantship. He was already predicted by the Buddha to become one of the 2 chief disciples of the Buddha, and along with his friend Moggallana, they were ordained together, and Moggallana achieved arahantship after 1 week of meditation. But Sāriputta had to investigate and explore many more phenomena in order to become the chief disciple in wisdom. So that's why it took him a longer time, all of 2 weeks, to reach the final goal. And so according to this sutta, Sāriputta's approach to enlightenment was to enter each of the meditative attainments of samadhi or samatha, the 4 jhanas, and then the 4 formless meditations, and to investigate and to explore those meditative states, first analytically, by dissecting them into their constituent mental factors, and then to explore them, we might say, dynamically in terms of their arising and passing away. And so last week we took the first state attained and experienced by Sāriputta, that is the first jhana. And then this passage says that, or it ends by saying that after entering that state, contemplating it, becoming detached from it, Sāriputta saw that there is what's called, the text calls this, an escape beyond. And then it says with the cultivation of that, he confirmed that there is. And in this case, the escape beyond the first jhana is the second jhana. Okay, so now we can come back to the text, and we're taking with section 5. So the Buddha is explaining how Sāriputta developed his meditation. So the text says, "Again, bhikkhus, with the stilling of applied and sustained thought, Sāriputta entered and abided in the second jhana, which has self-confidence," that's the translation here, "and singleness of mind without applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of concentration." So this is the classical or the standard formula for the second jhana. And what's distinctive of the second jhana as compared with the first is that two factors present in the first jhana vanish with the attainment of the second jhana. And what are those two factors? They're what are called in Pali vitakka and vichara, which is translated here as applied thought and sustained thought. Excuse me?
Are you taking questions now or at the end?
At points within the exposition, I'll ask for questions, and then at the end. But first, let me just go through and... Okay, so in the first jhana, we have vitakka, which is said to have the function of directing the mind onto the object, or sometimes it's explained a little more sort of metaphorically as lifting the mind and placing it onto the object. Then vichara has the function of, sometimes it's said, of rubbing the object or exploring the object, examining the object. Piti here is translated rapture, or you could render it as joy, elation, uplifting of the mind. And sukha is pleasure. It's the pleasant feeling. And then there is one pointedness, which is the fixing of the mind on the object, or the unification of the mind on the object. So those are the actual factors of the first jhana. Now, to progress from the first jhana to the second jhana, it's said that what the meditator has to do is after emerging from the first jhana, well, first he has to master the first jhana, to get it high degree of control over the first jhana, so that he could attain it whenever he wants, remain in it as long as he wants, and emerge from it whenever he wants, right on the spot. So after gaining a certain degree of facility in the first jhana, then the meditator coming out will look into that jhana and see that there's still some degree of imperfection or disturbance in the first jhana. And what is causing that disturbance in the first jhana? Not somebody else's cell phone with the musical theme. But within the jhana itself, there is vitakka and vichara, which are relatively coarse mental factors. And so he sees that those factors are rather coarse, and since he's acquainted with the Buddha's teaching, or even if outside the Buddha's teaching, even the non-Buddhist meditative systems have this gradation of stages of concentration, they see that there is a more peaceful, more excellent state beyond this, in which this activity of thought, investigation, examination have subsided, a state in which the mind becomes much more quiet, much more peaceful than in the first jhana. So it's like the first jhana is a little bit like the lake. Maybe on a day like today, or maybe it's a little too cold, but no, I think you could see that the lake on the whole is very still. You just look out the window. But there's still a little, very subtle pattern of wavelets over the surface of the lake. And so those little wavelets is like the activity of vitakka and vichara. And so if we really wanted to have a lake that's perfectly flat, just like a mirror, then that little bit of breeze would have to stop. And then all of those little wavelets disappear, and the lake becomes perfectly smooth. So that is like the subsiding of vitakka and vichara going into the second jhana. And so it said at the beginning of the description, with the stilling, upassama, quieting down or subsiding of applied and sustained thought, Sāriputta entered and abided in the second jhana, which has, here I don't actually like the rendering self-confidence. Self-confidence, that's what my mother would always say to me when I was like in high school, you need more self-confidence. Don't be so shy. Don't be backwards. Get up there and sell yourself. But the Pali is ajatang, which means, could be taken as within oneself. Ajatang ceto sampasadanang. And another implication of the word sampasadanang is not confidence, but a serenity, or now in my latest translation I use placidity, becoming very peaceful. Placidity, sampasadana, or if placidity is a little bookish, serenity, tranquility. So it's like the further tranquilization, internal tranquilization, and then singleness of mind This brings to prominence the factor of one-pointedness, which is now being brought in. And then we have without applied and sustained thought. And now it says rapture and pleasure born of concentration, born of samadhi. If you go back and look at the formula for the first jhana, you see that it says that it's accompanied by rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Vivekajang piti sukham. This is because in the first jhana, the mind becomes secluded or separated from unwholesome states, unwholesome mental qualities. And so as the mind becomes separated or secluded from the unwholesome mental qualities, then there arise this pure joy and pleasure, which are said to be born of that seclusion, born of the separation from the disturbing or unwholesome mental factors. But now, in moving from the first jhana to the second jhana, the degree of concentration or samadhi becomes stronger. And so now it's said that the rapture and pleasure are born of concentration. So even though rapture and pleasure are present both in the first jhana and the second jhana, but there's a difference in quality between them. In the first jhana, because there's the connection with applied and sustained thought, still the rapture and pleasure are a little bit coarse. But in the second jhana, they become more refined, more purified. Okay, before we go on, did you have the question?
Well, I just was thinking that in the mental practice and the concentration practice, that would be just directing the mind when you're saying the phrases.
Yeah, I think we usually like to have you use the microphone so the question will get recorded.
Hold it. That's all. Okay.
Oh, yeah, okay.
No, my question was in relation to metta as a concentration practice.
Yeah.
So it would be with the phrases would be, sorry. The phrases would be directing the mind on the phrases. Would that be vitaka?
That would actually be, in that process, the activity of vitaka would be prominent. Yeah. Yeah, but even in, say, a more simpler meditative practice, say mindfulness and breathing, where you don't use full phrases, but the task is just to keep the mind on the breath, then vitaka would be that factor which is sort of lifting up the mind and putting it on the sensation of the breath coming in and out. Or if one is using a verbal formula, like when you're breathing in, it would be vitaka, which is formulating, verbalizing in. And when breathing out, it would be vitaka, which is verbalizing out. But even when the meditation becomes very, very subtle, even in the first jhana, there's no discursive verbalization like that. But there's still this very subtle activity of directing the mind onto the object. And that is said to be the work of vitaka. And then the way I see vichara, or what I sustain thought, or I use now examination, it's what is sort of looking at the object, not examining it from the standpoint of insight, not looking deeply into it to see its characteristics, but just sort of looking at the object. Okay, so now Sāriputta enters the second jhana, And now the Buddha is going to explain how Sāriputta did this special contemplation of the second jhana. So it says that the states in the second jhana, the self-confidence, or I would say internal tranquility, the rapture, the pleasure, the unification of mind. Okay, so those are the factors that are mentioned in the formula itself. Then we have additional factors: the contact, feeling, perception, volition, and mind. This, I think, as I mentioned last time, this forms a set of factors which is sometimes called the group with contact as the fifth, because we have here 5 factors which are present in every state of consciousness. Every state of consciousness involves contact, that is, the mind contacting the object. There's some feeling. In this case, it's a pleasant feeling. There's perception. There is volition or chaitana. And of course, there is citta, which is the mind. And then we have a bundle of other factors. Here, the next one is translated zeal. Again, I don't quite like this, because the word zeal, when somebody gets really enthusiastic, like when the Jehovah's Witnesses come at the door and say, "Can I introduce you to our organization?" That's zeal. But when people get all worked up, you see maybe at the presidential conventions, USA, USA, USA. That's zeal. But this is, in Pali, it's chanda, which is, I translate this as desire. And it's desire not in the negative sense of craving, but in order to achieve anything, one needs some desire to achieve it. So this is the desire to realize one's goal, the desire to achieve one's objective. So there is that desire, there is decision, or maybe better in this case, resolve, resolution, since one had to make that resolution on reaching the jhana. So there is that zeal, resolution, energy, of course there has to be, that effort, that mental power, mindfulness, equanimity, and attention. Now what's interesting to note here, and I think we came across this even in the formula for the first jhana, even though in the standard jhana formulas, mindfulness and equanimity are explicitly mentioned only when we come to the third jhana, but in the enumeration of factors that we see here in the second jhana, mindfulness and equanimity are already present. And in fact, mindfulness and equanimity are present even in the stages preliminary to the jhana. As one is practicing the meditation, one is, in order to keep the mind on the object, one needs mindfulness. So mindfulness is a key factor for the attainment of the jhana itself. And then as one is practicing meditation towards the jhana, one is gradually developing equanimity, which here doesn't mean, it's not equanimity in the sense of neutral feeling, but it's equanimity in the sense of balance of mind. Or sometimes it's called the neutral state of mind, or keeping the mind right there in the middle. For example, when we're sitting in meditation, as time goes by, after could be 30 minutes, 40 minutes, we start to get some pain in the legs. And so normally, if you're just sitting at your desk without any mindfulness, you may be sitting, reading a book, you get a little uncomfortable in one posture, and even without thinking about it, you just shift to another posture, and you're not even aware that you've shifted. But what's taken place is that there was some, very subtle aversion towards the old posture, the painful posture, and then a deliberate effort to change the posture. But when you're sitting in meditation, when the pain starts to come up, instead of, reacting against it, you tell yourself, endure it, don't pay any attention to it, just go back to the meditation object. And so the pain is coming up, but you're not being, disturbed by it. And so in this way, you're starting to get equanimity, keeping the mind in the middle, not disturbed, in this case, by bodily pain. And sometimes, maybe as you're sitting, some pleasant memory will come up, or maybe some special pleasant feelings will start to come up as the mind settles down. The mind will become bright, clear. Feeling of joy will start to arise. But again, when that arises, if you're practicing properly, then you tell yourself, don't indulge in it, don't become attached to it, just note it and let it go. And so with this, again, you're keeping the mind in the middle. And so already, even in this preliminary stage, way below the jhana, but one is building up this equanimity as keeping the mind in the middle, keeping the mind balanced, not being repelled by any painful feelings, painful bodily feelings, or it could be, as you're sitting in meditation, painful memories come up, or feelings of aversion towards people that come into your mind. But again, you just have to, dismiss those thoughts, dismiss those feelings, and keep the mind in the middle, keep the mind in balance. So keeping the mind in balance, not repelled by pain, not attracted to pleasant thoughts, pleasant feelings. One is moving towards this balance that becomes more prominent in the jhanic states. Okay, so we have this mindfulness, equanimity, and then in every state of consciousness we have attention. And so Sāriputta looked into the jhana, in this case the second jhana, and saw how the jhana is maybe we call it a constellation, or a conjunction, or assemblage, amalgamation of this diversity of mental factors. And so this is, in a sense, setting the stage for wisdom, because wisdom, from one angle, is the ability to examine one's experience and see it in terms of physical factors, bodily factors, and mental factors. And here, since the jhanic state is predominantly a mental experience, he's seeing the jhana as this assemblage of mental factors. And so one function of this analytical investigation of the jhana is, how would we express this? Maybe we could say it's a deconstruction of the sense of self. Because what happens with many of the meditative systems, the non-Buddhist meditative systems, where they have a practice of concentration, contemplative prayer, or simple mindfulness exercises, where the mind can enter, through these practices, the mind can enter into a state of samadhi, deep concentration. But without that analytical framework, the meditator will grasp upon that experience as the revelation of the true self, the realization of the true self, the real I, the indestructible, permanent, universal, all-embracing Atman. That's the absolute self. But with the Buddhist framework, one looks into that mental state and sees how this deep meditative state of concentration is an assemblage of distinct mental factors. And each one will be able to sort of conceptually isolate or distinguish, maybe distinguish is better than isolate, to distinguish it conceptually, see its distinctive flavor or characteristic, see its function which within this total experience. And so this is a little bit like maybe, in physics, back in the late 19th century, early 20th century, as they were doing investigations into the constitution of matter, finally the scientists, maybe anybody who has a better background in the history of physics could correct me. Is it Rutherford, who came up with the atomic theory, who sort of isolated the atoms and said, now we've done it, we found the fundamental constituents of matter. Matter is made of atoms. And I think the Greek derivation of atom is, the word atom is prefix a plus tum, has something to do with division. So the atom means that which is indivisible, that which can't be divided. But then come from the early 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, a decade or two later, what do they do with the atom? They investigate further. Yeah? Yeah. Then they discover the atom is not indivisible after all, but it's made up of subatomic particles. I remember when I was a boy, we used to read about protons, electrons, neutrons. That's it. Those are the fundamentals. But then as scientists went on investigating further, what they find out that the neutron is actually a combination of several particles. And then they discover a whole, somebody called it the zoo of subatomic particles. A whole variety of subatomic particles. And then now I think they've reduced those to quarks. I think now they're saying everything is constituted by a combination of 4 or 6 types of quarks. But I bet the hair on my head that in 20, 30 years from now they'll be finding that the quarks are made up of snarks. And the snarks are made up of snark. Excuse me? Oh, I think string theory is passé. So 1990s. Okay, so anyway, so by analyzing an apparent whole into its constituents, we sort of break up or pull away the foundation for the ascription of the quality of selfhood, substantial selfhood, to this experience. Okay, but to correct or to balance the analytical aspect of the teaching, we also have the aspect of conditionality, which shows that we don't only analyze phenomena into constituents, but we also see how these constituents are all tied together into a vast net of conditional relations, so that they're all sort of, in a sense, all unified within this network of conditionality. Okay, but now Sāriputta, after breaking the jhanic experience down into these factors, now he's going to contemplate with insight, to explore with insight. So the Buddha says that these states were defined by him one by one as they occurred. Then the Buddha says, known to him, those dhammas, those factors arose, known they were present, known they disappeared. So now Sāriputta is turning from an analytical investigation of the jhana to an examination of the jhana in terms of, we call this the insight into impermanence, the contemplation of impermanence. And here, impermanence isn't to be taken just, in the very broad, general sense that everything comes to an end, that we all have to grow old and die. But this is what we might call that the macroscopic concept of impermanence. But this is the microscopic insight into impermanence, the insight that even at the level of moment-by-moment experience, things are arising, standing just for a moment, then passing away. And so Sāriputta is saying how even the jhana is constituted by an ever-changing flow of mental factors, factors which are arising, standing, passing away, arising, standing, passing away. And so then he understood, here to get the full text we go back to section 4, he understood thus, so indeed these states, not having been, come into being, and having been, they vanish. This might seem rather trivial when you just read it in print, but when one experiences it with insight, it's really quite, let's say, almost a startling or mind-opening experience. Because when one is examining one's experience with insight, when the mindfulness and the contemplation become very clear and precise, one sees how at any moment the whole bundle of factors of experience is coming into being and then just in a split second vanishing. So like, for example, when we're walking back and forth, doing the walking meditation, in the grosser stages, it seems like I'm walking back and forth. Here I'm taking the right step, left step, right step, left step. And so it seems like there's a persisting subject there, which is taking one step after another step, one step after another step. But when the mind, when one really builds up very strong momentum of contemplation, then even in lifting up, say, the right foot, in that one act of lifting up the right foot, one is seeing, like dozens of times, even in that one act of lifting the foot, one sees that the physical process that make up the foot, almost at the molecular level, are arising and passing, arising and passing. And the mind that's aware of lifting up the foot is also undergoing constant succession of thoughts of arising, 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 till one comes to the fully lifted foot, then bringing the foot forward. One sees, even in that one act of bringing the foot forward, that the physical components of the foot are arising and passing, arising and passing. And the mind that is aware of that is also arising and passing, arising and passing. And then when putting the foot down, again the same thing. So, before raising the foot is not raised. In raising the foot is in the act of being raised. When one stops raising the foot, then the act of raising is finished. So there is already an insight into impermanence. When bringing the foot forward, before one brings the foot forward, the movement of the foot forward has not occurred. As one is bringing the foot forward, it's occurring. When one stops bringing the foot forward, the forward movement has stopped. Then in bringing the foot down, before bringing the foot down, the downward movement has not occurred. When bringing the foot down, the downward movement is occurring. When the foot is fully down, the downward movement has stopped. So this is impermanence just in one step. Raising, bringing forward, putting down. Even at the Course level, 3 steps. Before lifting, it's not there. When lifting, it's occurring. And then it stops, bringing forward, putting down, the same thing. And so, as the mindfulness becomes ever stronger, one starts to see into this coming into being and passing out of being at subtler and subtler levels. And so indeed, these states not having been, come into being, having been, they vanish. Then regarding these states, he abided, unattracted, unrepelled. This shows the absence of craving and aversion, independent, detached, free, dissociated, with a mind rid of barriers. And then he understood there is an escape beyond, and with the cultivation of that attainment, he confirmed that there is an escape beyond. Okay, any questions on this presentation so far? Yeah, please.
How do you differentiate mindfulness and attention?
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, the question is, how does one differentiate mindfulness from attention? Okay, the way attention is explained, attention is that particular mental function which turns the mind to an object. We see it most clearly in the case when maybe one's attention is turned to one thing, and then suppose from this direction somebody is in the stacks of the books and there's a sound of a dropping, then our mind turns to that. What caused that dropping sound? Or what caused that collision sound? And so here we're turning the mind to that object. That brings out the function of attention most clearly. But attention is present, it said, in every act of consciousness. Of course, in every act of consciousness, there has to be the turning of the mind to the object. Now, the way I understand mindfulness would be that factor which is responsible for keeping the object in mind and not letting the mind drift away from its object. So whereas attention can be a purely like spontaneous, just natural function of the mind, mindfulness involves some degree of deliberate effort, the deliberate effort to keep the object in mind and to prevent the mind from slipping away from the object, or to prevent the object from slipping out of view of the mind.
So intention is like a grosser form, and then the mindfulness comes in.
I would say that, yeah.
And then, could you give an example of volition in this state?
Volition would be the will or intention of keeping the mind on the object. But one thing I have to say about these mental factors is that, the distinctions between them are often very subtle. So it's said to show what the Buddha accomplished by analyzing experience into these different factors. The work called The Questions of King Milinda Panna gives this simile of the chef in a kitchen who is preparing a soup, and he puts into the soup like black pepper, oregano, basil, cumin. What are some other things one puts into this? Okay, let's say just that's enough. Cumin, coriander, turmeric. Excuse me? Oregano. I said oregano. I said yeah. So he puts all of these spices in, and then when he serves the soup, if you can, taste the soup and then you distinguish, that aspect of the flavor is what's coming from the oregano, that's what's coming from the black pepper, that's what's coming from the coriander, that's from the turmeric, that's from the cumin powder. It takes a really super sharp tongue to distinguish the contributions of the different spices. Okay, let's move on. Okay.
So back to our first question. The mindfulness would be Yanasino Manasikara?
No, mindfulness is sati. Mindfulness is sati. Attention is manasikara.
And appropriate attention is Yanasino?
Yoniso manasikara. But my opinion is that yoniso manasikara is a more complex phenomena. We translate it, or it's often translated wise attention or careful attention. But here, I think manasikara involves like more reflection, consideration, contemplation. So it's a more complex than this manasikara, which is the simple bare act of attention. Okay, let us move on now to the third jhana. Okay, so Sāriputta, he's with the cultivation of this attainment, he confirms that there is an escape beyond this, and the escape beyond this is the third jhana. And so now to move from the second jhana to the third jhana, what the meditator does after gaining facility in the second jhana, he looks into the second jhana, and he sees that even though it's more peaceful in the first jhana, but there's still something. You say that there's still a little troublemaker in the back of the room. What is the little troublemaker in this case? Right, rapture or piti or joy. Because this factor of piti involves some subtle kind of exuberance, or it could spill over into a kind of exuberance or exhilaration, and it becomes like an object of attachment. And so since the meditator has now this map of the stages, he'll know that there is a meditative attainment more peaceful, more excellent than the second jhana, in which rapture vanishes. And that is the third jhana. And so he'll practice aspiring to the third jhana, strengthening his concentration, and when the mental faculties are sufficiently strong, then he moves into the third jhana. And so here we have the formula for the third jhana. The Buddha says, again, with the fading away as well of rapture, Sāriputta abided in equanimity and mindful and fully aware, but with clear comprehension. Still feeling pleasure with the body, he entered upon and abided in the third jhana, on account of which the noble ones announce or declare, he has a pleasant abiding, who has equanimity and is mindful. Okay, so in terms of the usual sort of standard list of jhana factors, in moving to the third jhana, we've lost vitakka, vichara, and now piti is gone, but we still have sukha or pleasure and one-pointedness of mind. But the sutta formula mentions another bunch of factors that become prominent in the third jhana. And so we have here three factors which are now given distinct mention. One of these is equanimity, which we saw is already present in the first and second jhana, but now it's becoming so prominent that it gains mention in its own right. And then the second factor is now mindfulness, again present all through, but now it becomes more prominent. And the third factor is indicated by the word fully aware, and this is, in Pali, this is sampajanya, or the adjective form is sampajano, which the word sampajano comes from. It's related to the word for knowing. The verb that means to know is janati, and sang and pa are prefixes which are intended to indicate some aspects of this knowing. So it's, here we could call it like a clear knowing or a clear understanding. But it's not yet the kind of knowing or understanding that comes from panya, what we call wisdom. But this is sort of a clarity, maybe we call it the power of clear observation. And again, this will be a quality which is present all through the process of developing meditation and in the lower jhanas. Since, for example, when one is practicing, say if one is practicing mindfulness of breathing, then distracting thoughts arise, then one becomes aware distracting thoughts have arisen. So that knowing that distracting thought has arisen, that is, we would say that is one of the functions of sampajanya, clear comprehension. So mindfulness, you could say, is the factor which the awareness itself, this gets a little confusion. How to put this, distinguish them. Okay, a distracting thought has arisen. So mindfulness is what brings that distracting thought to the mind, that which enables one to be aware that the distracting thought has arisen. Then clear comprehension would be, say, what designates it a distracting thought, or which understands that this thought is a distracting thought. So mindfulness makes the thought present to awareness, and then clear comprehension understands it as a distraction. Does that make the distinction clear? To some extent. Okay, so now the third jhana, there's equanimity, mindfulness, full awareness or clear comprehension, and still feeling pleasure with the body. So the pleasant feeling is still present. So he enters and dwells in the third jhana. Okay, so now Sāriputta, having entered that state, now he contemplates the factors present in it. And so now the text will enumerate the various factors that are present. So it mentions equanimity, pleasure, mindfulness, the full awareness, and the unification of mind. Then the 5 factors beginning with contact, and then the other factors, seal, decision, energy, mindfulness, equanimity, and attention. And then these states are defined by him individually, distinctly, then they're known as they arise, as they remain present, as they vanish. Okay, we'll move on, and then I'll take questions after we go through a few other states. Okay, now we come to the 4th jhana. Now to move from the 3rd jhana to the 4th jhana, the meditator first masters the 3rd jhana, then he looks into the 3rd jhana and sees that there's still a little imperfection in the 3rd jhana, that there's still maybe like a hair in the soup, so to speak. And what is that hair in the soup in this case?
Sukha.
Right, it's sukha. It's the pleasant feeling. Of course, normally we all like pleasant feeling. But the pleasant feeling is somehow connected even at a very subtle level with some attachment. And so it's a little disturbing to the perfect tranquility of the mind. And distinct from pleasant feeling, there's another kind of feeling which is called a dukkhamasukha vedana, which means the feeling which is neither pleasant nor painful. This is a neutral feeling which is completely quiet and peaceful. And that feeling is what arises in beyond the 3rd jhana, in the 4th jhana. And so the meditator is now aware that there is that neutral feeling, and so he aspires to that neutral feeling. He contemplates the fault of pleasant feeling in the 3rd jhana, continues to meditate, and when the concentration becomes strong enough, then he moves into the 4th jhana. And so here we have the formula for the fourth jhana. Again, monks, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, Sāriputta entered and abided in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure. That's that neutral feeling, and which has purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. So here in the fourth jhana, the mindfulness becomes fully ripened, fully purified, and this purification of mindfulness comes about because of the equanimity. So it's said that, I think in some of the commentaries, that in the third jhana, we would say that mindfulness is like the full moon on a night which is very clear, but there's still a little bit of haze in the sky. So even though you could see the full moon, it's not like our ordinary mind, which is like the full moon on a night with stormy rain clouds, where you just occasionally get the impression of the moon. But in the third jhana, it's like the full moon is like, in the third jhana, it's like the full moon on this night where it's like 90% clear, just 10% little haze, which is occasionally obscuring the clarity of the moon. But on a real like winter night, like middle of January, where the sky is completely clear and it's the full moon, then the moon is so bright and brilliant, and you could see it, just shining and illuminating. Like if you come out on a full moon night like that, and you look at the lake, everything, it's almost you could take a book out and read a book. The moon is so bright. So this is like the mindfulness in the fourth jhana. Okay, so now Sāriputta contemplates the factors in the fourth jhana, and here we have some differences introduced. So he sees the equanimity, the neither painful nor pleasant feeling, and now this is, the neither painful nor pleasant feeling is new. And now here we have something that's new introduced, and this is called the mental unconcern due to tranquility. So now, or maybe better than mental unconcern, the mental effortlessness due to tranquility. Because the mind has become so tranquil that no further effort seems needed to maintain the mind in that state. Okay, then there's the purity of mindfulness and the unification of mind. So those are the factors, except for the mental unconcern. The other factors are mentioned in the formula for the fourth jhana. Then we have the 5 beginning with contact. Then we have the other factors, zeal, decision, and so forth. So these are defined by him one by one as they occurred, known they arise, known they were present, known they disappeared, and so forth. Okay, so here in the fourth jhana, Okay, at this point, any questions? Stephen?
Okay, I was wondering, since we're told that only in the fourth jhana does this neither pain nor pleasure quality arise, when we investigate Vedana in our regular lives,
Yeah.
can we say then when we feel neutral feelings, which seems quite often we just don't really have any feeling towards it, are we just deluding ourselves?
No, it's actually not true that neither painful nor pleasant feeling only arises or first arises in the fourth jhana. In our ordinary experience, also many times there's the neither painful nor pleasant experience, neither painful nor pleasant feeling. For example, just if we're maybe just taking a walk down the street, I say most of the time there's the neither painful nor pleasant feeling going on. It's just that as one is going up through the jhanas, in the lower jhanas, there are the feeling of pleasure. The pleasant feeling becomes prominent and then increases in intensity, but also in subtlety, until one comes to the third jhana, where it reaches the peak of intensity. But then, beyond the third jhana, there's the fourth jhana, and what makes the fourth jhana distinct is that it has that more peaceful feeling of neither pleasure nor pain. Dave?
Would another word for this be dispassionate? Would that be something that would describe this? That what you're really talking about is dispassionate observation or awareness?
I think one could put it in that way, except that, you see, the word dispassion enters in different contexts within a Buddhist framework. So there's, say, a dispassion that is involved in developing the jhanas, so that one becomes dispassionate first. To go to the first jhana, one has to become dispassionate at least to the play of things in ordinary experience. And then to go up from one stage to another, one becomes dispassionate towards the prominent factors of the lower jhanas. So there is a kind of dispassion that comes through ascending these levels of concentration. But then there's another kind of dispassion which comes through insight, where one is seeing distinctly, the arising and falling, or the arising and passing away of phenomena. And then because one sees them as impermanent, then one becomes dispassionate towards them. So it's a different kind of dispassion. Yeah, Matt?
Could you please explain what you mean by unification of the mind?
Is there a microphone?
Unification of mind.
Okay. Oh, what is meant by unification of mind? Okay, the question is, what is meant by unification of mind? Okay, unification of mind here would be initially keeping the mind on one object so that the mind doesn't depart from that one object.
Is that not like vichara?
You mean vitaka? Let's say that there's a difference in aspect. The two are close in that vitaka, as I understand it, or as the text explain it, is what directs the mind to the object, what puts the mind on the object, which focuses the mind on the object. And then I'd say one pointedness is the quality that emerges. Maybe we could say it that way, that vitaka is a more active quality, and one-pointedness, or mental unification, is a more emergent quality. So one-pointedness is what emerges from the work of vitaka. Vitaka is the activity of lifting the mind and putting it on the object. And as the mind is placed on the object again and again, then it stays on the object, becomes steadied on the object, and doesn't, deviate from the object. And then we say that the one-pointedness has emerged and is becoming stronger. That's the way I would express the difference. Okay, let us go on so we could finish today. Okay, so now we've come to the fourth jhana, and these are sometimes called the form realm jhanas, because now the states that lie beyond them are the formless states. And this begins with the first formless state, which is the base of the infinity of space. And so the formula goes that with the complete surmounting of perceptions of form, with the disappearance of perceptions of sensory impact, with non-attention to perceptions of diversity, aware that space is infinite, Sāriputta entered and abided in the base of infinite space. Now, the way it's explained that one moves from the fourth jhana to the base of infinite space, it said that one has to develop the fourth jhana using a particular object or nimitta which appears visually in front of one as a kind of inwardly visualized form. Sometimes takes the form of a bright circle of light. And that is the object in the jhanic state. And now to move to the formless states, one takes that bright light or bright colored disk and expands it and extends it till it seems to cover everything in one's field of mental vision. So one expands it boundlessly. Then one removes the visible or the visualized form. One makes the determination sort of to roll it up and put it aside, just like if you have a carpet in the living room and you want to redecorate the living room, you roll up the carpet and bring it out and put it in the hall. And so you roll up that carpet and put it aside, or you roll up that mentally visualized form and put it away. And what remains when one removes the form is the space that the form was occupying. So now there's just space there with no form. And so this is the disappearance of the perception of sensory impact, or the overcoming of perception of form. And so now one enters and dwells in the base of infinite space. And so now in the list of states in the base of infinite space, it said that there's the perception of the base of infinite space and the unification of mind, still very prominent. Then all of the other factors are the same. Okay, we go through all of those, it's all the same. Now moving from the base of infinite space to the next second level of formless attainments, the base of infinite consciousness. Okay, now the meditator in the base of infinite space is aware that space is infinite. And so there is that awareness of infinite space, and the awareness here is consciousness. So one is conscious of infinite space. So now instead of attending to the infinity of space, one makes a subtle redirection of the awareness to the consciousness of infinite space. It's just like, okay, to use a rather mundane example, I'm here, sitting here now, aware of a classroom full of tables, chairs, students, lights, a roof, and so on. But I could redirect my attention from the object of focus on the classroom or library reading room to my awareness of the reading room. And so now instead of, it's a little weird, even when I do that, it gives a weird feeling. So you just redirect the attention from everything outside. You try it, but don't slip into samadhi. So you're sitting there, like normally you're just looking at me, and I hope so, listening attentively or taking notes. But now you could just sort of refocus on your awareness of the room with the other students and the teacher and desks and tables and desks and chairs and so on. But that example pertains to rather very ordinary objects. But now one is doing the same thing with this very exalted object, shifting from infinite space to the consciousness of infinite space. And so one gets the sense of the infinity of consciousness. And when we use like this expression, infinity of consciousness, if you read like some of the books of the mystics, you get a kind of glorification of infinite consciousness, like this is the ultimate, this is the supreme, this is the highest state. But in Buddhism, that's not the case. Like this is just, it's a very high meditative state, but it's just a mundane state which is constituted of mental factors. It's impermanent, bound up with dukkha, not to be taken as I, mine, myself. Okay, now to pass from the base of infinite space to the third, from the base of infinite consciousness to the third attainment. This is called the base of nothingness. Again, one has to redirect one's attention. And so the text says, again, monks, by completely surmounting or overcoming the base of infinite consciousness, aware that there is nothing, Sāriputta entered and abided in the base of nothingness. Now the base of what's called the base of nothingness here, akinchanyayatana, the word nothingness here has nothing to do with emptiness or sunyata. The sunyata is a philosophical concept which is used in relation to wisdom or insight. Especially in Mahayana Buddhism, it becomes like the ultimate nature of all phenomena is emptiness. But the nothingness spoken of here is not related to emptiness in that philosophical sense, but it's just the designation for a very high state of meditative concentration. And this is attained by redirecting the attention from that infinite consciousness to the absence of any kind of obstructedness or solidity in that infinite consciousness. So it's focusing on the unobstructedness of the infinite consciousness, that absence of any impediment in the infinite consciousness. I see some of you are looking at me with puzzled expressions. It's pretty abstract, yeah. So if you don't understand, I've done my best. But just think, maybe it's easy to do it with space rather than consciousness. We look at space, so I could focus on space as the capacity for occupancy. So that's the normal conception of space. So within that space, we could have tables, chairs, a thermos flask, cups, and so on. Everything fits into space. So that's the nature of space, is to be able to, for things to occupy it. But we could also focus on the aspect of space as being without any obstruction. So if you just take space itself, rather than the things in space, there's just no impediment, no obstruction. So if I want to go from here to that table, what will be obstructing me is this table. But if there's just space there, nothing else in the space, I can move without any obstruction. So just think that consciousness also is, in a sense, without any obstruction, without any impediment. Within that infinite consciousness, there's nothing solid, nothing substantial impeding it or blocking it. So in that way you get the aspect of nothingness. Okay, so then Sāriputta contemplated the states in the base of nothingness. The only new one here we have is the perception of the base of nothingness. Everything else the same. So now we'll move on to the fourth attainment. So then this is expressed very simply. By completely surmounting the base of nothingness, Sāriputta entered upon and abided in the base of neither perception nor non-perception. So this is the fourth formless meditation, in which perception has become so subtle, so fine, that it's difficult to say whether it's present or not. In fact, it said that perception is present there, so it is a state with perception, but the perception is so refined and so subtle that one can't, clearly distinguish its function. So that's why it said that one could also say that there's no perception there. Again, that's a little bit abstract. But now this is interesting with regard to the base of neither perception nor non-perception. It said that, you see, in the other description of the other attainments, it seems as if Sāriputta is contemplating those factors within the attainment itself, even though according to the commentaries or the traditional explanation it said to contemplate them he has to come out from the attainment. But here it said, with the fourth formless meditation, he emerged mindful from that attainment. Having done so, he contemplated the states that had passed, ceased, and changed thus. So indeed, those states, not having been, come into being, and having been, they vanish. And then regarding those states, he abided unattracted, unrepelled, independent, detached, dissociated, with a mind rid of barriers, and so on. So you'll see that here, it's not said that Sāriputta contemplated the factors, those states, one by one as they occurred. And the reason is that this fourth formless attainment is so subtle, and all of the factors there have been brought to such a state of subtlety and refinement that it's impossible, even for somebody with the sharpness of Sāriputta, to contemplate the actual individual factors within that attainment. The only one who can do that, it said, is the perfectly enlightened Buddha, the Sammasambuddha. But amongst all of the disciples, even the wisest like Sāriputta, there's still a limit to their ability to distinguish those factors. And so, if somebody like Sāriputta had trouble distinguishing those factors, don't worry if even the names of these states are something of a puzzle. So what Sāriputta has to do, he's able to enter that attainment, but what he has to do is to emerge from it, and then he knows that the states that were present there have now vanished. And so he realizes that when he entered the attainment, they came to be, and now that he's emerged from it, they vanish. But he can't contemplate those actual states themselves. David?
Emergence from
Yeah. Yeah.
one can enter into them again.
Oh, of course, he could, yeah.
What sort of is the, if one gets to a particular level, when one begins meditation, do you go right to that level, or do you have to go through all of these stages all over again?
After one has mastered all of the levels? I think it's not necessary to go through the earlier stages. One makes the determination, I want to go into the base of neither perception or non-perception, and then one will go into it. Okay, but Sāriputta, let's finish up. So Sāriputta understood that there is an escape beyond, and so now the escape beyond, it said that, here in paragraph 19, again, monks, by completely surmounting the base of neither perception nor non-perception, Sāriputta entered upon and abided in, this is a state called the cessation of perception and feeling. In Pali, it's called Sanya Vedayita Nirodha. Okay, so this is a state in which all perception, all feeling, and it's said even that all consciousness ceases, all mental functions cease. And it's said that whereas the 8 previous meditative attainments can be entered through the power of samadhi, to enter the cessation of perception and feeling, one has to bring together both samadhi and wisdom, samadhi, concentration, and insight. So to enter this, what one does is here one has to go through the gradual, step by step, through the 8 attainments. One enters the first jhana, comes out of it, contemplates its factors with insight as impermanent, dukkha, non-self. Then one goes into the second jhana, contemplates the factors impermanent, dukkha, non-self, and so on with the third jhana, fourth jhana, up to the base of nothingness, One comes out from the base of nothingness, contemplates its factors, impermanent, dukkha, non-self. Then one makes the determination to enter the cessation of perception and feeling. Then one directs the mind to the meditative object, and then one goes into the fourth formless attainment, neither perception nor neither perception nor non-perception. One goes into that for just a few turns of consciousness, and then all the mental activity ceases. The body, of course, continues to function, but the breathing has already stopped. And then one remains in that state for a predetermined time, and then one comes out. And it's said that this state, the base of the cessation of perception and feeling, is accessible only to non-returners and arahants. Okay, so Sāriputta enters that state, and then the text adds, this is a little puzzling why it adds this here, it says, and his taints or his asavas were destroyed by his seeing with wisdom. So it's a little bit of a puzzle. Where and when did Sāriputta contemplate with wisdom in order to destroy his defilements, his taints or asavas? He couldn't contemplate with wisdom in the attainment itself, because there's no mental activity there. Could it be that he emerged from that attainment and then contemplated immediately after emerging and then destroyed the defilements? But then there's a contradiction between the account of Sāriputta's enlightenment in this sutta and an account given in another sutta, which we must have covered maybe about a year ago. This is sutta number 74 in the Majjhima Nikaya, the very end of the Dighanakha Sutta, towards the very end of the Dighanakha Sutta. It's on page 606, and it's paragraph 14. Here, the Buddha is speaking to a wandering ascetic by the name of Dighanakha, Longnails, who is said to be Sāriputta's nephew, according to one account, his uncle on another account. And the Buddha is explaining to him the contemplation of feeling, and Sāriputta is just standing next to the Buddha, fanning him. So it must have been a hot day, and Sāriputta is fanning him and just listening in on the discourse. And while Sāriputta is listening, Sāriputta reflects that the Blessed One is speaking about the abandoning of things through direct knowledge. He's speaking about the relinquishing of these things through direct knowledge. And then as the Venerable Sāriputta considered this, through not clinging, his mind was liberated from the taints. So according to this account, Sāriputta achieved arahantship not through entering and emerging from particular meditative attainments, but he was, fully conscious in what we would call a ordinary state of consciousness, listening to the Buddha give a discourse, reflecting on the discourse, and then on that basis, he gained insight and eradicated the defilements. Where according to Sutta 111, Sāriputta entered each of these attainments and emerged, and then at a certain point it said, by seeing with wisdom, his taints were destroyed. So it's difficult to bring the two accounts together. Anyway, we'll just continue to close up the discussion. So then it said that, in paragraph 20 here, Sāriputta emerged mindful from that attainment. And now there's no states to be contemplated within that attainment itself. But having done so, he recalled the states that had passed, ceased, and changed thus. It seems that this must be referring to his experience before entering cessation. So indeed, those states not having been common to being, having been, they vanish. And regarding those states, again, he abided unattracted, unrepelled, independent, detached, free, dissociated with a mind rid of barriers. Then he understood there is no escape beyond, and with the cultivation of that attainment, he confirmed that there is not. Okay, then the sutta ends with a kind of paean of praise to Sāriputta. So it says, the Buddha says, rightly speaking, were it to be said of anyone, he has attained mastery and perfection in noble virtue, in noble concentration and noble wisdom. He's attained mastery and perfection in noble liberation. It is of Sāriputta indeed that this should be said. Rightly speaking, were to be said of anyone, he is the son of the Blessed One, born of his breast, born of his mouth, born of the Dhamma, created by the Dhamma, and heir in the Dhamma, not an heir in material things. It is of Sāriputta indeed that rightly speaking this should be said. Monks, the matchless wheel of the Dhamma, set rolling by the Tathagata, by the Buddha himself, is kept rolling rightly by Sāriputta. Okay, so that's what the Buddha said, and then the monks were satisfied and delighted in his words. So what do you think? What's the impression? Asman, yeah. Maybe take the microphone. I think one has to leave a little distance between the box and the phone itself.
Okay, as far as the destruction of the taints in 111, it sounds like to me that it would be just the lower taints.
It would be what?
Just the lower taints.
I don't think so, because when that expression is used, just about everywhere it's used, it always signifies the attainment of arahantship. It's sort of like a stock formulaic expression.
The reason why I said that is because of, at this point, he's only a non-returner. He's not an arahat yet, which means the 5 lower feathers have been destroyed.
Oh, that, I see what you mean. But it would seem that the lower feathers have been destroyed. So what this would be referring to, this would have to be referring to the subtler level of the feathers, the subtler feathers that remain.
Right.
Oh, I see. I thought you said that okay, I see your point. But I think in both passages, 74, Sutta 74, and this one, it's referring to this. In both places where that expression, having seen with wisdom his taints were destroyed, is referring to his attainment of arahantship. But there's still a contradiction there. At least it seems to me a contradiction. In one, he's attaining it while reflecting on the discourse he's heard from the Buddha. In 111, he's attaining it after emerging from this attainment of cessation. I don't remember what the commentary says. Maybe it says that while he was listening to the discourse, he very quickly, momentarily entered cessation and came out and reflected, but that doesn't sound so conceivable to me. That while standing there fanning the Buddha, he's going to enter into cessation. It would seem he would be sitting cross-legged on the floor in a private place. Anyway, I'll tell you my impression, then we'll break for lunch. I told you that there's no counterpart in any of the other, parallel collections of texts, like the Chinese agamas, Sanskrit fragments that have been discovered, other parallels to the Pali Nikayas, no parallel to the Sutta, no counterpart to the Sutta. So my supposition is that this Sutta is a little bit apocryphal. That means a little bit of a later compilation which was inserted into the Majjhima Nikaya. And it represents, as I said last week, or the last class, something of the process of evolution from the Sutta, from the early texts, the Nikayas, towards the Abhidhamma. As we start to get the Abhidhamma flavor here of analyzing a state of consciousness into its constituents. And perhaps the purpose is to extol Sāriputta, because you see that there's this, at the beginning of the sutta, there's this, the Buddha praises Sāriputta as one with vast wisdom, sharp wisdom, quick wisdom, broad wisdom. And then at the end, he says that if anyone is to be called a son, if speaking rightly, one were to call anyone a son of the Buddha, born of his breast, and so on, it is of Sāriputta that one would say this. One might conjecture that there could have been a little bit of competition for the position of leading disciple after the Buddha passed away, except that, according to all traditions, I think Sāriputta passed away a few months before the Buddha passed away. So there's no question here of, we call this the horse race between, or the race for prominence. I don't like to use these words in relation to the great monks. But you could see like maybe groups of disciples want to push their teacher up into first place. So you could see a group centered around Sāriputta wants to get Sāriputta in number one spot. A group around Ananda wants to get Ananda in number one spot. The group around Mahakassapa wants to get Mahakassapa number one. But Sāriputta passed away before the Buddha did, so that kind of position wouldn't make sense. So maybe it's in a way to glorify the memory of Sāriputta. We don't know. But I'll leave you with those thoughts to digest along with your lunch, and then we'll come back. Let us say, give you time for a comfortable lunch. We'll have a discussion period, maybe 12:30. Okay, so we end with the sharing of the merits. Sharing the merits with the devas, the bhutas or fair spirits, the nagas, the dragon spirits, and so on. Wishing them to protect the Buddha's teaching, to protect the world, to protect ourselves and others. Akasata chabumata deva naga mehedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasadam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mehedika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata Deva Naga Mahedika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mang Parang. Okay, the next one in the short way. Eta Vatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Sabbe Bhutanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Sabbe Satanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Bhavagupadaya Vichihetato Etantare Satakayupapana Rupya Rupicha Sanya Sanino Dukha Pamuchantu Pusantu Nibuting. Okay, we'll end with 3 half bows to the Buddha. Okay, we have the class next Saturday, also in the library. And next Saturday, we'll take Sutta number 112 in the Majjhima Nikaya. And remember, we'll have the discussion starting 12:30 today.